Today is our last installment of the Twits. I hope you've been enjoying a chance to get to finish the book, and I've been enjoying the pictures that some of you have been sending to me. So I hope today you'll get to draw a really fantastic one, as it'll be our last one that we'll get to do with this book. So, the birds and the monkeys have just finished painting glue on the carpet and all of the furniture inside the Twits' living room, and they stuck them where? Onto the ceiling. Now it's time to see if the Twits come home and if Mugglewump's trick really worked. The next chapter is called The Ravens Swoop Over. They had only just finished the job when the roly-poly bird came swooping in, screaming, "They're coming back! They're coming back!" Quickly, the birds flew back onto the roof of the house. The monkeys rushed into their cage and stood upside down, one on top of the other. A moment later, Mr. and Mrs. Twit came marching into the garden, each carrying a fearsome-looking gun. "I'm glad to see those monkeys are still upside down," said Mr. Twit. "They're too stupid to do anything else," said Mrs. Twit. "Hey, look at all those cheeky birds still up there on the roof. Let's go inside and load our lovely new guns. Then it'll be bang, 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 and the bird pie for supper." Well, just as Mr. and Mrs. Twit were about to enter the house, two black ravens swooped low on their heads. Each bird carried a paintbrush in their claw, and each paintbrush had been smeared with sticky glue. As the ravens whizzed over, they brushed a streak of sticky glue onto the tops of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's heads, and they did it with the lightest touch. But even so, the Twits both felt it. "What was that?" cried Mrs. Twit. "Some beastly bird has dropped his dirty droppings on my head." "On mine too," shouted Mr. Twit. "I felt it! I felt it!" "Well, don't touch it," cried Mrs. Twit. "You'll get it all over your hands. Come inside and we'll wash it off in the sink." When they called it dirty droppings, do you know what the Twits think it is? They think the birds pooped on their heads. So they don't want to touch it because they're afraid that it's poop. So they want to go wash it out. They're going to go inside and try to wash out this bird poop. It's not really bird poop. Let's see what happens. "Those filthy, dirty brutes," yelled Mr. Twit. "I'll bet they did it on purpose. Just wait till I've loaded up my gun." Mrs. Twit got the key from under the doormat, where Mugglewump had carefully replaced it, and into the house they went. The next chapter's called The Twits Are Turned Upside Down. "What's this?" gasped Mr. Twit as they entered the living room. "What's happened?" screamed Mrs. Twit. They stood in the middle of the room, looking up. All the furniture, the big table, the chairs, the sofa, the lamps, the little side table, the cabinet with bottles of beer in it, the ornaments, the electric heater, the carpet, everything was stuck upside down to the ceiling. The pictures were upside down on the walls, and the floor they were standing on was absolutely bare. What's more, it had been painted white to look like the ceiling. Boy, they thought of everything. So here's what they walked into. Crazy, huh? "Look!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "That's the floor! The floor's up there! This is the ceiling! We are standing on the ceiling!" "We're upside down," gasped Mr. Twit. "We must be upside down. We are standing on the ceiling, looking down at the floor." "Oh, help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Help! I'm beginning to feel so giddy." So am I," said Mr. Twit. "I don't like this one bit. We're upside down and all the blood's going to my head," screamed Mrs. Twit. "If we don't do something quickly, I shall die. I know I will." "I've got it," cried Mr. Twit. "I know what we'll do. We'll stand on our heads. Then anyway, we'll be the right way up." So they stood on their heads, and of course, the moment the tops of their heads touched the floor, the sticky glue that the ravens had brushed on a few moments before did its job. They were stuck. They were pinned down, cemented, glued, fixed to the floorboards. Now, through a crack in the door, the monkeys watched. They jumped right out of their cage the moment the Twits had gone inside. And the roly-poly bird watched. All the other birds flew in and out to catch a glimpse of this extraordinary sight. Can you imagine a bunch of birds flying in and out of your house? Well, the next chapter is called The Monkey's Escape. Yay! That evening, Mugglewump and his family went up to the big wood on top of the hill, and in the tallest tree of all, they built a marvelous tree house. All the birds, especially the big ones, the crows and rooks and magpies, made their nests around the tree. They did this so nobody could see the tree house from the ground. You can't stay up here forever, you know, the roly-poly bird said. Well, why not? Asked Mugglewump. It's a lovely place. Well, just wait till winter comes, the roly-poly bird said. Monkeys don't like cold weather, do they? We most certainly don't, cried Mugglewump. Are the winters so very cold all the way up here? Well, it's all snow and ice, said the roly-poly bird. Sometimes it's so cold, a bird will wake up in the morning with his feet frozen to the bough that he's been roosting on. Well, then what shall we do? Cried Mugglewump. My family will all be deep freezed. No, they won't, said the roly-poly bird, because when the first leaves start falling from the trees in the autumn, you can all fly home to Africa with me. Don't be ridiculous, said Mugglewump. Monkeys can't fly. Well, you can sit on my back, said the roly-poly bird. I shall take you one at a time. You will travel by the roly-poly superjet, and it won't cost you a penny. That was very kind of him. I think he was grateful that the monkeys had saved all of these birds from dying a horrible death. So the next chapter is called The Twits Get the Shrinks. And down here in the horrid house, Mr. and Mrs. Twit are still stuck upside down to the floor of the living room. It's all your fault, yelled Mr. Twit, thrashing his legs in the air. You're the one, you ugly cow, who went hopping around shouting, we're upside down, we're upside down. And you're the one who said to stand on our heads so we would be the right way up, you whiskery old warthog, screamed Mrs. Twit. Now we'll never get free. We're stuck here forever. You may be stuck here forever, said Mr. Twit, but not me. I'm going to get away. Mr. Twit wriggled and squirmed, and he squiggled and wormed, and he twisted and turned, and he choggled and churned. But the sticky glue held him to the floor just as tightly as it had once held the poor birds in the big dead tree. He was still as upside down as ever, standing on his head. But heads are not made to be stood upon. If you stand on your head for a very long time, a horrid thing happens. And this was where Mr. Twit got his biggest shock of all. With so much weight on it from up above, his head began to get squashed on into his body. So quite soon, it completely disappeared. His head had sunk out of the fatty folds of his flabby neck. I'm shrinking, burbled Mr. Twit. So am I, cried Mrs. Twit. Help me. Save me! Call a doctor! Yelled Mr. Twit. I'm getting the dreaded shrinks! And so he was. Mrs. Twit was getting the dreaded shrinks too. And this time it wasn't a fake. It was the real thing. Their heads shrank into their necks. Do you remember this? Their necks began shrinking into their bodies. Their bodies began shrinking into their legs. And their legs began shrinking into their feet. And 1 week later, on a nice sunny afternoon, a man called Fred came around to check their gas meter. When nobody answered the door, Fred peeped into the house, and there he saw, on the floor of the living room, 2 bundles of old clothes, 2 pairs of shoes, and a walking stick. There was nothing more left in this world of Mr. and Mrs. Twit. And everyone, including Fred, shouted, hooray. Did you imagine that was going to happen to the Twits? That they were going to have the actual shrinks, and in the end, all that would be left was their shoes and their clothes, and then Mrs. Twit's walking stick? They're gone. They completely shrunk up forever and ever. The monkeys, the birds, they never have anything to worry about again. How wonderful. What a great ending to the story. I love the Twits by Roald Dahl. I hope you have enjoyed finally getting to hear the end of the story. Maybe while you're home, see if you can get onto Clever and read one of Roald Dahl's other books, maybe on Destiny or on Sora. Have a great afternoon, guys. Bye-bye.